Hello and welcome to the Heaven Bound Podcast, where we're opening the Bible in search of fuel for your spiritual journey. This is where we talk about life the way it was meant to be and what it means to be a disciple of Jesus in the 21st century. Wherever you are, thanks for joining us on the journey. We hope you enjoy this conversation with Roger Schaus and Carson Crow.
Welcome. It's good to have each of you with us today. I'm Roger Schaus, and this is our Friday podcast that we like to have with you. Sitting in the studio today, instead of Jason, is Carson Crow. Carson is our new evangelist here at Charlestown Road, and last Friday, as Jason was interviewing him, he was talking about just the aspect of preaching and getting to know Carson. And we're going to add another layer to that today as I kind of interview him a little bit more and talk a little bit more about preaching. But Carson, it's great to have you with us today.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thank you so much.
Yes, and it's great for this congregation to have this transition. We have three evangelists at the moment, and I will be fading out, and Carson's fading in, and that's just a wonderful thing to do. When it comes to preaching, there are many, many layers and aspects of that. Preachers have a lot on their schedule as they work. They have classes that they teach, and they have to prepare for those. There's articles that they write, whether it's for the bulletin or for the blogs. There's podcasts, as we're doing right now. There's studying with others. There's evangelism, and there's just their personal study. But on top of all of that, when we think about preachers, we think about sermons. Jesus told the apostles in Mark 16 to go into all the world and preach. Paul told young Timothy to preach the word. And so it's very common on a typical Sunday to see the preacher behind the pulpit. His sermon is finished, it's all polished, and it's just ready to go. But what a lot of folks don't know is, how does the preacher get to that point? And so with Carson today, we want to spend a little bit of time talking about the writing of a sermon. Just how do you get from point A to point B to the final finished product? And one of the first things that people always ask, and this is something that I think if you don't do this on a regular basis, it just seems complicated and hard, and that is, where do you get your ideas? And so Carson, we'll begin with that. Just how do you start a sermon?
I remember reading, actually, one of your jump starts a few weeks ago when you were talking about this very idea, and I couldn't relate more. You said in that preachers get their ideas from everywhere, and it is truly that. When it comes to where I find my ideas for what I'm preaching in the pulpit, it could be in the grocery store. There's been times where I've seen things in there and I think, man, that could be an interesting sermon intro right there. Or it could be even a conversation I had with the U-Haul person the other day. I'm going to work into a sermon a little bit later on here at Charlestown Road. They're just everywhere. But primarily where my ideas come from is the question why and what. What am I struggling with? What do I need to hear? Why would this be something worth sharing with the audience? Those are the fundamental questions that I wrestle with that ultimately lead me to choose between good ideas and good sermons.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes somebody will have a question. Can you explain this? And that becomes a sermon. Sometimes it's just seeing what's going on. I think that's what makes preaching relevant, is when you see what's going on in the world, going on in the congregation, and you address those things. Some sermons are tailored to be more encouraging, more uplifting. Some are maybe more doctrine-oriented. We're trying to teach somebody some principles. Sometimes it's warnings, where we're trying to get people to see the dangers of such things. But like you say, they come everywhere. I was in London several years ago, and they had the sign on the people mover in the airport that says, "Face the direction you're going." And that became a sermon. I thought, that's just a great idea, you know. There's a lot of people in the world who want to go to heaven, but they're not facing the right direction. You got to face the direction you're going. And so you'll see things like that. And so that begins a spark. I like that idea. So take me from there.
So once I wrestle with those questions, the idea, and ultimately find some way to resonate with it. One of my rules for preaching, aside from routine doctrinal sermons, is I've got to have some buy-in myself. Do I struggle with this? Do I find this interesting? Do I find a way in which I can resonate with the sermon? Because if I don't, people are not going to see this passion and love behind the words very quickly. So once I do that, we go to what I call film study. Part of my routine is every Monday morning, I have what you might characterize in the sports world as just the film room, right? I'm going to watch 2-3 lessons on YouTube, on websites, on the topic that I'll be preaching on. Sometimes it's to do it for more informational reasons, to better understand the topic, better understand the text. Other times it's to see how people present on the topic. What routes do they take? What things do they draw out of the text? What rhythm do they give to the sermon? And then ultimately, once I get past that, we go to the commentaries, we go to the books. And then by the end of Monday morning, my goal is to not just think about what I'm going to preach on, but have an actual understanding to the words behind it. Right.
That's great. And, we're a couple generations apart.
Yeah.
And so I'm still a paper and pen guy is how I start. And, I do a lot of writing on paper and pen before I put it into my computer. I expect Carson goes straight to the computer to start with, but that, each person has to do what they do. And so as you're developing that sermon, you're getting ideas. For me, I'm scratching out things, writing things down, circling things. Pretty soon you go to the Bible, you go to the text. And we look for some text that's going to build this idea for us and kind of look at this, whether it's Old Testament, something the Lord says, one of his parables. But then you gotta dig into the text. And Carson, take me through that just a little bit, if you will.
Yeah, well, I think what I'm working on right now, just a spoiler alert for those listening, our Charlestown Road fam, is I'm working on Genesis 9 right now and the sin of Noah that comes right after the flood. And that process has been rereading and reading and reading. And it really gives you this appreciation. And I love that I get to do this full time. I think there is just a beauty in not being a tent maker, but able to 7 days a week just read a text over and over again in preparation for Sunday. Because it really draws out things that maybe you've missed, maybe you've never noticed. You get to just explore it. And I just love doing that. So yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. And I've seen things that I've definitely missed before, and just that exploration of the text in preparation for a sermon.
And so in that digging, what I often do is, you're going to look at different versions, different translations. Yep. You're going to see how things word things. And then as you go through it, you're going to see some words that you think, well, maybe the audience doesn't know them. Maybe I don't know what this word means. And so you're going to get out your spiritual shovels and you're going to start digging a little bit. You know what? You're going to chase this word down. And what does this mean? And sometimes you'll find that this word is used other places, and you're going to chase those rabbits a little bit. And so in developing this, there's a lot of directions this thing can go. It can just start exploding with different ideas, different things. And one of the keys is to kind of hone it in, bring it all back together, and find out that, okay, I've got a lot of this stuff, but some of this stuff is just not going to fit in my sermon. And that's one of the things about studying. You're learning a whole bunch of things, but you may not use everything you've learned because you want to be focused in your sermon, and you don't want the audience to be so confused. You're going here, you're going there, and have no idea what you're talking about. You're taking them on a journey. And so part of that is shaping the sermon up and putting meat on the bones. And you do that by just kind of keep digging in the text, looking at things. How much personality do you think goes into a sermon?
I think so many. And I also think as much as you want and need. I think there's some sermons where my personality is just overflowing. You see it in the sermon intro. You see it in the vocabulary that's used, maybe a little bit younger, my generational type language. You see it even in the application, the pertinence of things, the relevancy of things. But then there's others. For example, when I preach on doctrine, when I preach on maybe the authority of Scripture and things like that really I want to remove my personality. I want to just preach the text, let the text do all the work, and I just want to show people what the Lord wants, right? And I just kind of want to remove myself from that equation, right? But to your last point, can I just say this? There's a great line I heard a couple of years ago by a guy named David Banning, who's one of my mentors in life. He always told me on that subject of how there's so many of these rabbit trails and different things and different Greek words and all things that you learn in your study that go in preparation for a lesson. He always told me, Carson, try not to preach about something, try to preach on something. And so that's kind of the phrase that I use every single week as I go into something. So with Genesis 9, there's a lot of things I could talk about, right, in that story. I could talk about Hebrews 11 and Noah's faith. I could talk about the different Hebrew wording in Noah's sin and how there's ties to Leviticus and Deuteronomy. I could talk about the genealogies that play into that text and the future promises. But what I want to preach on is how good people can make mistakes and what we can learn from that. And so David Banning, I love that line, is when I go to preach in the pulpit, I don't want to just throw a lot of things at the wall and hope they stick. I want to take one topic, one thing, and I want to give it to the people so they can remember it.
And that's the key there. We're trying to, we can't preach the entire Bible in one sermon. You can't. I think sometimes people look at sermons as being a multivitamin. I'll come in and get everything I need right now. Well, you don't. And so you're building upon this and that, and that helps get that concept across to the people that this is something that here's one central point, and I need to see that, and that will help me with that. If you were going to give, let's say, somebody who does Wednesday night invitations, some suggestions. We have a big audience here. We have an international audience. So we have people all over the world who listens to us. They're writing sermons. Some of them are just doing it for Wednesday night invitations. What would be some tips that you would give somebody?
I think the first thing that I would say, and I just see a lot of guys, particularly who are younger than me, who are getting started with invitations and devotionals and things, struggle with this. My advice to them would be, don't try to reinvent the wheel. This book has been around for thousands of years. There have been millions and millions of sermons. I once had a man told me, and I think this is a line that has been said many times in history, if you're coming up with a new idea, reinterpreting something that's never been interpreted that way before, you're probably wrong, right? And so, I just think back to an invitation I heard of a young man starting out who talked about David and Goliath, and he interpreted this way that it's just not factually true and not widely seen. And I just remember thinking, I know why he's doing that. It's not because I think he actually believes what he's saying. I think it's because he's trying to do something that is going to get remembered, something that's going to stand out, something where people are going to pat him on the back and say, man, I've never thought about it that way before. And if you're setting out with those motives, you're probably going to end up in a not good destination, right? And so what I would say to young guys in particular is, hey, let's set out on trying to do something well, maybe not trying to do something new.
Right. There's that old saying people say about the preacher hiding himself behind the cross. I think some guys come in front of the cross.
Yep.
And because of that, we can't see the cross. And they want to impress the audience with some big word that no one will ever remember after that. And they do things like that. And it's like, that's not useful. What's really helped me through the years is just to look at the Sermon on the Mount. You don't need a dictionary in one hand and a Bible in the other hand to figure out what Jesus said. The hardest thing about the Sermon on the Mount is just applying it, doing it. But the message is to the language of the people. Jesus understood where the audience was. And that's the key of preaching. You've got to know your audience. You've got to know where they're at. And from that, then you start building upon these concepts about that. Well, if I was to ask you in sermon writing, what is the hardest part for you? What would you say?
That's a really good question, and I want the audience to know they don't prep me on these questions in preparation for these podcasts. I would say the hardest thing is trying to find a balance between what I like and what people need. I think that would probably be the thing I struggle with. There are sermons I love to preach. There are things that I love to talk about, right? Apologetics is one of those things. I could preach 52 lessons on apologetics in a year, and I would be over the moon. That would be the best thing on earth. But what I had to learn really early on is not everyone thinks like me, and not everyone is at the level I'm at. Some are more advanced, some are not as advanced. And there's other people that need other lessons on topics that maybe I don't struggle with, but nonetheless they do, right? And so it's trying to find this balance between, like you said earlier, that word personality, what I love and what makes me smile in the pulpit, but also making sure everyone's fed and everyone's brought up to speed. And so I think that maybe is one of the hard things that I have to wrestle with every single week is who's missing out this week and who do I need to get to next week, right? And just making sure all these groups are touched in different ways.
That's great. That's a great thought. And again, when we think about preaching to a larger audience like we have here at Charlestown Road, you got so much diversity. You've got folks who are looking to Jesus. You got people who are in Jesus. You got people who've been around for a long time. People are brand new. I remember several years ago going through the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And after services, a guy came up to me and said, "Did that really happen?" He said, "I'd never heard that before." And I was amazed. And so what that told me is you don't make assumptions. You don't think, well, here's something everybody knows. Well, that's not always true. And so you have to be careful as you walk through these things and make sure everyone's staying with you as you consider what we're doing. Now, when we think about sermons, so you get all the sermon done. When you go to the pulpit, what do you take up there with you other than your Bible?
I take my iPad with me, and that's about it, right? I am someone who bought into very early on, thanks to my good mother and now my good wife, reminding me that I am not good off the cuff. I take a manuscript with me, right? I find the most security in that. There's a large group of preachers who do very well without a full manuscript. I am not one of those human beings. Again, I do not trust myself without my full manuscript up there. And so what I do to account for the deficiencies of that, which are primarily, you'll hear preachers say, you're robotic, it seems scripted, it seems like you're just performing up there. I spend a lot of time prepping and memorizing beforehand and going up there.
Yeah, and every preacher has his own way. My son Jordan, who preaches in Dallas, he'll write out his sermon, but then he memorizes it, and he takes no notes. I don't know how he does it, but I'm like you. I still take paper. I take paper up there, and part of that is I just a little paranoid if the electronics go bad and everything's on electronics, what I'm going to do. So I always take up a paper copy. But again, that's part of the personality. Every preacher has to do what he has to do to become effective and to be right and to make it smooth as it should be. So Sunday's sermon's over. What do you do with your sermon? It's all over. How do you file it? How do you keep it?
Well, most of it's electronic,
Okay.
like you're alluding to. I've got sermons filed away in my laptop by category and by date. And typically, I've loved growing up in this era of just time period, because when I need to preach on something and teach on something, it is just so easy to find those things that I've preached on and taught on, to pull from them, to copy and paste from them with just simple word search in my laptop.
And I've got systems like that too. And again, to our listening audience, sometimes when you've preached 4 or 5 times, you got just a few outlines, and you think, well, I know where they are. You put 10, 15 years behind that, and now you got a whole bunch of outlines, and I don't remember where they're at or things like that. It's good to have some kind of system where you can find what you need. For me, there's been a lot of crossover. Out of sermons have come my blogs, or out of my blogs have come classes, and they all kind of cross over. And when you're really efficient like that, you can get those things, and it really helps you as you consider working for the Lord and the best in the kingdom along this way. Well, as we wrap this up, Carson, any thoughts you'd like to say along this line?
Well, can I ask you? I think the audience would be really interested, and I'm just really curious. You've been at Charlestown Road now 18 years, correct?
18 and a half years,
How do you go about writing a sermon in the sense of the creativity that it requires after 18 years to preach again and again and keep it fresh in the pulpit in the same place?
Well, I've learned a lot. I'm not musical. My wife is very musical, but I've been fascinated with songwriters. I've watched a lot of documentaries about songwriters, and I see a lot of parallels, just coming up with that idea, being fresh. And so for me, constantly reading, always keeping your eyes open, observing. I just have never had a problem of coming out of ideas. My problem is there's not enough Sundays. If we had 7 Sundays a week, I would love that, because I would do that. I love writing sermons. If there was a job just to write sermons and someone else preach them, I'd be a happy, happy boy. But, going from idea in your head to the finished product, there's a process there. And, again, for those who are not used to that and never done that, they see the preacher up Sunday morning and, you just work 1 day a week. Well, there was a lot of hours going to that sermon. And 1 week, and then it's over, and he's got to start all over again for the next week. And so for me, just, you know what you've preached before. And when you've been with a group for a long time, you know what you've done before. You know what they need. You know some things going on in the congregation, and that just keeps you going. And so you're going to bounce back and forth. We need to talk a little bit about marriage here. We're going to do some parenting things here. We're going to do some doctrinal stuff. We've got some deaths in the congregation. We've got to do some things on encouragement. And then you layer that knowing what kind of classes are being taught at the same time. And so, this is being done over here, so I really don't have to address that because we got a class taking care of that. But you're really just, you jumped in with both feet. And that's the best way I can explain it. And as you're going through that, it just keeps going and keeps going. Years and years ago, I remember sitting down with a preacher. I had just started preaching. He had preached for 10 years, and he said that he's out of ideas. And I thought, wow, is that what happens? But it doesn't. I think you keep those creative juices flowing. You see things, you write them down, you're going to store it for another day. Here comes another sermon. You hear something, you hear someone else preach a sermon. You think, that's a great idea, and I'm going to take that and work it myself and make it that way. So for me, if the Lord allowed me to have another 200 years here at this congregation, I don't think I'd run out of ideas, because it's just the Word of God is so rich. It's so wonderful to talk about these things, and I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. Well, it's great to have you with us, Carson. We are looking forward to lots and lots of sermons from you. This is just the beginning of some great things, and as I kind of fade out of the scene and you take over, this is just a wonderful concept for this congregation, and I think great days are ahead of us. If you're in our area, welcome you to come on Sundays and to be part of this congregation, to learn from God's Word. If you're not, everything we do is on our website, every sermon, and you can grab them, learn from them, and just keep growing. So thankful that we could be together today, and we look forward to Sunday, the best day of the week. Thank you.
Special thank you to Roger and Carson for their work in the studio today. Thanks to all of you for listening to the Heaven Bound podcast. We hope it's helped you set your mind on things above and given you a little more fuel for the journey. Always remember, when you're walking with Jesus, you're heaven bound, and the best is yet to come.